I'd now like to introduce to the stage Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, who is the chairman of Karandaaz and is the former Federal Minister for Finance and the Governor of SBP. Welcome to the stage, man. More, please.
Assalamu alaikum to everybody and Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I have to thank nobody but Asfar, who has roped me into his group and was kind enough to extend me an invitation, which is a great opportunity to meet such learned people here and to hear about everybody's perspective. I have to say at the outset that I totally agree with Qiyas on everything, but I have opted not to discuss Pakistan here simply because I have been working more at an international level on a number of subjects. So what I'm going to present is a little bit of what my reading and interface has been, fortunately through webinars. So I'm going to talk about the significance of green recovery and the role of climate finance, look more forward. We all know that recovery is in the air, but it's of course uneven across the globe. Challenges abound as the world is in the grip of what we have heard, the health, social, looming debt crisis, and climate crisis. All these elements have been things that I've been looking at. Delays in the resolution of these intertwined risks carries inherent risk of complicating global scenario and hence difficulties for developing and emerging markets. We think pandemic was worse than the Great Depression as the world lost trillions of dollars worth output. Inaction on climate, by all estimates, will be costlier than the actions needed today, as we from the UN have been talking about for ages. More than pandemic, climate respects no borders, but climate change destroys not only civilizations, but the ecology and nature, which again, coming from the UN, we value a lot. Pandemic has touched all segments and interlinkages between economic, social, and environmental dimensions, which are the core elements of sustainability, are visibly underscoring need for fast-tracking the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and climate-related nationally determined contribution. I'm proud to report that during my 6 years in the UN, I was affiliated with the development of the 2015 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as on the architecture of the Paris Agreement with my colleagues. COVID has dealt a severe blow to emerging markets and developing countries, and IMF has plenty of evidence to this effect. In this context, the relevance and significance of green recovery and the role climate finance plays calls for transformation of socio-economic model of countries towards a climate neutral, resilient, sustainable, and inclusive development, an ideal world like what was being talked about a while back. And since I have been listening to the various debates on the webinar of this corporate group, I have to say I need to congratulate on the quality of thinking and debate that goes on by our corporate leaders. It is in this context, of course, I am really happy to see that the relevance and the significance of the green recovery and role of climate finance has gained momentum. And this is evident also in virtually every corner of the globe, but at different pace and sequencing. Conceptually, as some of you may know more than others, that practically green recovery may not have been defined very well, but it calls for a massive transformation of our socio-economic model of countries, as I said, being climate neutral, resilient. I'm repeating this. Pre-COVID, as I said, there has been very slow progress to implement SDGs and climate goals. And of course, we are far from our commitments to NDCs. Just to give you a small example, a recent study found that the 2008 financial crisis recovery is pegged to be about 16% green. So this is the previous crisis. Pre-COVID, after that, climate finance crossed US dollar $500 billion mark as the annual flows have risen to about $579 billion on average over the 2-year period of the 17 and 18. Now, this represents clearly a momentum towards green and climate work, but and it has registered a 25% increase over the preceding fiscal year. And the rise also reflects increases in financing from virtually all time. Public-private financing mix is close now to 44 to 56% in the years when I'm quoting you over $500 billion funds. So fast forward that. Thus far, pandemic rescue packages, which are close to about 12 trillion, had to be devoted largely to propping up liquidity, curtailment of the spread of virus, incremental healthcare costs, protecting workers, incentivizing industry not to stop, not to go into bankruptcies. It has to be recognized that now, as we move from pandemic rescue to green recovery, G20 countries at best had 4% only of their funding devoted to green policies, with potential to reduce long-run greenhouse gas emission, 4% as brown, and likely to increase net greenhouse gas emissions beyond the base case. Now you'd say, why is she going into all this? Because the recovery is not going to be robust and sustainable if it's not green investments that are deployed and climate finance. Some mixed news at country level. The best news is Biden has won the elections, hopefully, if not further contested. And I believe that he's promised a US $2 trillion package of green recovery, which could bring out a transformational change if Republicans don't continue bickering about climate change action. EU has emerged as a front runner, as I see, devoting 30% of the euro 750 billion net green recovery fund. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this is because what they do out there will impact us in emerging markets and developing countries if we think more effectively. And a lot of countries where green recovery is being mainstream are countries like Korea and others, which are part of the geography in which I have worked also. So let me move further. Convergence of COVID to climate crisis calls for reflection on convergence of solutions. 3 principal areas where action is warranted, but I, of course, need to qualify the growing and unsustainable debt levels, including in our country, cast severe shadow over the prospects and ability of the green recovery and of the sovereigns to tap markets for climate and green finance, which is quite vibrant today, but also of leveraging SDG financing. So 3 things that are critical: incentivization to push green industry to enhance supply of solutions, technologies to support energy and transport transition, and energy efficiency and conservation is a must, and as well as we need to safeguard our ecosystem. All are major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. I am currently working on food security issues with the Deputy Secretary General, who has an advisory group for the 2030 21 Food Summit, and I was shell-shocked with the scientific evidence on how much of greenhouse gas emissions are emanated from agriculture sector itself. So we need to think of agriculture, and urban investments should be fostering green and smart cities, which is happening in a number of countries. I don't know why we can't get to it, backed by climate adaptation and mitigation. So given the size and nature of climate change, there is an agreement that fiscal action is critical. Now you ask yourself, how much of our fiscal action is directed at green recovery? I heard that there is a development policy loan being given by the World Bank for the green recovery. I just pray to God that it's properly used. It is critical both in terms of policy shift from fossil fuel subsidies to encouraging mainstream green development in the public finance. We, of course, need to leverage the world of finance, so we have bankers coming in here, and we have stock exchange president, I believe. So the equity markets have to play. Our stock exchange should be sustainable finance stock exchange, like a number of East Asian exchanges have done so. And we need to really nurture our long-term institutional investment industry. This is an area in which I have submitted to the government on their own request an insurance industry reform package. And I truly hope that this time around we do launch that reform, because as you know, that long-term institutional investors have already recognized the virtues of green and climate finance, and there is an emergence of infrastructure asset class which is investing in these areas and has an investor class backing them that recognizes that economic returns and dividends on saving our planet are much more than just the financial returns associated with it. The role of monetary stimulus and, of course, the role of financial regulators is very critical besides the fiscal action. I'm going to be very brief in this area. I could talk endlessly on financial regulation, but I have to say what is very disappointing thus far globally, I'm not touching too much on Pakistan, that we were hoping that financing a sustainable future for emerging markets should be possible by all the changes that are happening to the financial regulatory regime, but financing a sustainable future for emerging markets do require us to deploy about 4% of GDP for emerging market companies, and for low-income countries, almost 15% of GDP to reach SDGs and part of the journey to NDCs by 2030. Now, this is quite critical figure because, as I said, we are lagging a lot in these areas, but low-income countries are lagging much more acutely than others. My last point, and I'm skipping all the thought process that I had on the macroprudential regimes that are evolving with the support now of the central bankers, which have stayed away for decades from climate finance and green finance. They are jumping in a bigger way. And last year at this time, I was discussing at the IMF annual meetings really the regulatory architecture with Kristalina Georgieva, of the managing director of the IMF, about why central banks should jump into the game to fight climate and green to fight climate change and to supplement it with green finances, and what that architecture is. So I will close with just one area which I am currently deeply involved into, which is working on advising the G20 on developing a global debt relief program that allows for countries to stimulate green and inclusive uninterrupted recovery because right now, with the debt liabilities that country have, both the repayments as well as the interest obligations, there is limited fiscal space. So G20 was very generous to give a DSSI, which is the debt service holiday, so to speak. But it was only for 6 months. Pakistan has already availed, and very recently, it then went and stretched itself to giving a debt relief. So we, along with me, along with a bunch of other colleagues of mine internationally, have questioned that debt relief program, which was in November approved by G20, and we are demanding for much more than what G20 has agreed on, and our submission report, our report was launched on 16th November, which I will make available to our colleagues here for distribution to whoever is interested in, and we are working on disseminating widely, including in the UN as well as to the executive directors of the fund and the World Bank, to push G20 to really consider a bigger debt relief program, because a lot of countries are on the verge of default. Zambia just did that, but there are several others, and I don't want to take too much time to list, but we will not be able to have a recovery that can lift millions of poor, and as evidence has indicated that we have reversed the progress on poverty and inequality, equality achievements, and we have added 150 million more poor people to the ranks of extreme poor. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Despite your